The War Within beta launched this week, and since I've been spending a lot of time talking about tanks so far in the alpha, I wanted to put together a quick roundup on all of them so that players who are interested, or maybe are in the beta, can know what I've found exciting and good so far, and kind of be on the lookout for those things. So just to be clear, this isn't a tier list, it isn't an official ranking, it definitely isn't a guide on how to play stuff in a beta. This is just me, Llarold, saying what I think is fun and cool, or bad and lame. And with that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, my initial plan was to go alphabetically, but I think I'd rather just go in order of least to most fun. And so with least fun being our starting point, let's start with the least fun tank in the beta, Demon Hunter. Now just to kind of talk about like Demon Hunter as a whole class, I really love Havoc. I think it's super fun. I think the Glaive build is still super fun. It still rocks. The only real problem that I have with Demon Hunter, other than sort of the exhaustion of it being kind of the best tank for the last 2 seasons of Dragonflight, is that it really hasn't gotten any changes. And I think the reason for that is that it basically got the changes, the massive buffs that it was going to get in the War Within in that Season 3, patch 9.2 changeover. Maybe the best demonstration here is just to actually look at the list of changes for Demon Hunter in the beta. Here, there's really nothing going on. They've implemented hero specs for the class, and unfortunately I don't really love either of them. Eldrazi Reaver is sort of a combo-oriented gameplay, and it's the master of the glaive tree. While you were hanging out with girls, I was studying the glaive. The problem is that it's basically just like a 20-second single target damage bonus on a 35 to 45 second window. Really not all that interesting. And the alternative is Felscard, which seems like it's probably pretty good, but it's also fairly passive. It's just more spread out damage procs. Some of them you get it for going into Metamorphosis or going into Demon form by casting Fel Devastation. Some of them you just get kind of passively. Nothing really all that gameplay altering or super fun. Ultimately, my conclusion on Demon Hunter isn't like that it's bad. I don't think it's bad. In fact, I think it's very good. But it doesn't feel meaningfully different on the beta than it does right now on live servers. It just feels like it got some procs. So given that a lot of other tanks are getting substantial buffs and very interesting things, I think it feels like a big loser by comparison. Really, I think it's just that they haven't gotten to it yet. I'm sure that there will be some interesting stuff to talk about, but there's a reason that I've covered 5 tanks and haven't talked about Demon Hunter yet, and it's because there's nothing to talk about. Alright, now let's talk about Druids. So just to start with their DPS spec, the one that I've played, I think Feral is still fun, and it has gotten an okay rework. It's different, but it doesn't feel massively buffed in the way that Unholy DK or Windwalker Monk do. The Wild Stalker hero spec gets random bleed procs on top of your existing bleeds that kind of encourage you to funnel Ferocious Bites into a priority target to get bonus AoE damage procs. I do think that gameplay loop is pretty fun. The problem really is the hero specs for Bear Druid, and I guess also for Feral Druid, are a land of contrasts. Druid of the Claw Druid might be the worst hero spec in the entire game. Certainly I think it's the worst one that's not a Shaman hero spec. It gives you a random proc that sometimes makes your maul deal a bit of extra AoE damage. Bear already has an AoE maul, it's called Raise, and it is more consistent and effective. The tree also encourages cat weaving, but the damage on it just isn't good enough to actually be competitive. It's a complete miss of a hero talent tree so far. Chosen of Elune Bear Druid, on the other hand, basically turns you into a spell damage tank. You rain Moonfires constantly, and the whole tree is built around Lunar Beam, which still deals very little damage and is not a great spell on its own, but the cooldown becomes super short, like under 30 seconds, and it gives you a ton of mastery and leech while it's active. So it's a very strong tree despite Lunar Beam being a really bad base skill that it's built around. As for class reworks, the class tree for Bear Druid was shuffled. I guess I should just say the class tree for Druid was shuffled, but I don't really think it's been all that successful. They have taken some 3-point talents and turned them into 2-point talents, some 2-point talents and turned them into 1-point talents. Those are good. Then they've also taken the issue of not really being able to spec into multiple things in the class tree and preserved that. They've made it so you have to commit to being feral off spec. You can't be a mix of different things that easily. So on a 1 to 10 scale, I give it like a meh. The bear tree, on the other hand, has not been touched. 0 out of 10. Alright, now we're moving on to Paladin, which I am putting in the 4th place spot. I'll start by talking a bit about Ret. Ret is maybe the best spec in the game, and I cannot believe I am saying that, but I really do think it might be. It is a close contest in my mind between Ret and Blood DK. Blizzard has somehow managed to make Ret even simpler while also making it stronger. Ret Pallies automatically get wings when they use Wake of Ashes now, and both of their hero specs are built around procs that you get when you use Wake of Ashes. So the synergy there is absolutely insane. 10 out of 10, would highly recommend. Now as for their hero specs, Templar is the fun spec for both Protection and Ret, although I actually do really like both of Ret's hero specs a lot. They're very similar. Templar gives you a 2-button combo on Wake of Ashes as Ret or on Eye of Tyr as Prot. It deals a ton of damage and makes you summon just like an endless rain of hammers that deal tons of damage to nearby enemies. It's very fun. Lightsmith for Prot Pally, on the other hand, is not very fun. It gives you an external cooldown that you can use on other players or yourself, and it rotates back and forth between being an offensive cooldown or a defensive cooldown. The base cooldown on it is 1 minute, but in practice, with cooldown reduction talents available and a bit of cooldown reduction that's also built into the tree, it's more like 40 seconds or so. The one upside to it is that it is built like the priest bonus Winds of the Sun Priestess, where you and someone else always get the buff every single time you cast it, regardless of whether you cast it on yourself or someone else. You can be lazy and cast it on yourself and it'll randomly choose a player to put it on. You can be deliberate and cast it on an ally and you will also get it. Now, Prot Pally did get a moderate rework to their class tree. It's mostly a reshuffling, but they did kind of open up some new avenues, and I do think they might have been buffed somewhat just by the way that the talent tree was reshuffled. Consecrate now also gives you its buff for 4 seconds after you walk out of it, which is great. Pally is in good shape right now, so even if that was all they had done, I do think it would be good, but they also buffed Prot's damage with the beta by like 10 or 15%, so I do think they're going to be good moving forward. Now bear in mind they were at least 15% behind the rest of the, behind 5th place before that buff, so I do think this isn't the kind of buff that just catapults them from worst to first. I think it catapults them from worst to still not so great. The only real downside to Paladin is that I just think Lightsmith is an extremely boring talent that a lot of people will be pressured into playing for the purposes of making their group happy. I don't even necessarily think it's bad, I just think it's boring. Other than that, Paladin really feels very samey as Protection. I think it's been buffed and it is in a much better place. I'm pretty happy with it, but I'm not over the moon super excited either. It's vanilla ice cream. I like it. It's pretty good. I'm not getting hyped for it. Alright, now let's move on to my old favorite, Warrior. I've been falling back in love with Arms again. Fury has been my favorite spec in WoW since I first started playing all the way back in vanilla, but Arms is a spec on the rise and Fury is kind of also there. They removed Annihilator from Fury, which was a talent setup that I really enjoyed, just a playstyle that was very fun to me, so that's kind of a bummer. Even so, I like all 3 specs of Warrior in the War Within very much, but I think Fury is the least impressive of the 3. With that being said, Mountain Thane has been buffed since the initial unveiling, and it is a lot stronger now than it had been initially. As for Arms, the flow of the spec is great. It hits insanely hard, and I just really love the Colossus tree. And on that note, I love Colossus for Protection as well. It creates this enormous, very satisfying burst damage window. You buff up your Demolish, you pop all of your cooldowns like Demoralizing Shout and Avatar, and then you do your quick 3-hit combo with Demolish on an enemy, and you hit them so hard it kills their entire family. Mountain Thane is also pretty good. It just gives you a lot of lightning damage procs, and those can then grant rage generation and proc your shield slam having no cooldown, and it's all very fast paced and spammy, which is exactly what you want as a warrior. Now for the downside. The class tree has been reshuffled and the flow is a lot better now, but a lot of rage generation has been stripped away from things. The core concept of the class is still mostly the same, but you can more easily pick up Shockwave and Intervene. I do like that. Intervene now allows you to intercept spells, which you can then also reflect, so that's just a straight up buff. I think the thing that's frustrating is they're giving you this Rage in the Mountain Thane tree, and so they're pre-nerfing the base class so that that Rage now fills you back up to where you would have been if you just didn't have it in the first place. Who made this design decision? A tax collector? Thunderous Roar has also been nerfed, so it's back to being the year of the spear. But I actually find Spear to be more fun and kind of interesting anyway, so that's actually fine by me. As for the spec tree, that hasn't been given any substantial reworks. Battle-Scarred Veteran was made slightly more useful, but it's still not very good. Otherwise, the tree's kind of the same, and it's been kind of the same for a while. Now, with that being said, the class has gotten a lot of defensive bonuses, a lot of defensive buffs, so I think that's pretty good. The fact that defensive stance no longer has a damage penalty on it is something that should have stayed in from the Dragonflight alpha, but at least it's in there now. So I think the class is in good shape, and I think all around it's very fun. Alright, now for the most difficult choice I had to make in this video, picking a number 2. So just to start with Death Knight's DPS specs, I didn't really love Frost. I actually found it to be kind of slow and fairly weak while questing. As for Unholy, I really love it. It's gotten a pretty substantial rework and it feels really good. It relies much more heavily on Death Coil procs, Sudden Doom procs, and it just feels kind of more like the Unholy of old that I really love. Now, as for the hero specs, I'll give special mention to Rider of the Apocalypse, the Frost and Unholy specific tree. Being permanently mounted while in combat is so awesome. It really is a shame that that tree is not available to Blood, but I get it. Sen Lane, to talk about blood trees, is probably the single strongest hero spec in the entire game. It is basically a full bloodlust while you have Vampiric Blood active, and it's about 10% more haste when Vampiric Blood is not active, and it also gives you a ton of added damage. It is insanely strong. Deathbringer is, I think, the more fun hero spec. It creates 30-second burst damage windows, but it's definitely not as strong. It is strong though. It's good. It's just not game-breakingly strong. So if Sen Lane gets nerfed, Blood DK is still in great shape, probably the best of any tank, because their weak hero spec is actually still one of the best options available to any tank. Blood DK also got a massive rework to both the class tree and the spec tree, and I think that they have been a huge success. The initial unveiling was a threat of basically nerfing their resource generation, taking away Empower Rune Weapon, and so on. But changes in the class tree have made the resource concerns a non-issue. The class deals more consistent single target damage now than it did before, it has access to more defensive cooldowns than it did before, and it has way more snap AoE threat tools for the start of pulls. Bone Storm got a big redesign, Consumption and Blood Drinker are worth using now, and I actually think that the class is going to wind up stronger than before. If I had to pick a single downside, it's that the rework was a buff to DK in the same way that Blizzard has buffed Demon Hunters and Monks in Dragonflight. It added a ton of extra keybinds. This means that while the class is stronger, there's going to be a learning curve. Blood DK is worth the effort because it is insanely strong, but you do need to be warned that going into the class, you're gonna need to keybind a lot more skills now than you did before, and it was already kind of a keybind heavy class prior to the buff. And that means the most exciting class, to me, what a shock, is Monk. But I really do think it is. If we are doing a pound for pound ranking of entire classes, all the specs combined, I do think Monk might be the strongest. That's kind of a bad place to be at the start of the beta. There's plenty of time to nerf it, but at least right now, all three specs are buck wild. I don't think any other tank class is operating at that level on all of its specs. I really like the Conduit of the Celestials tree for Windwalker. It adds a bunch of random damage procs and an extra cooldown. Now I know what you're thinking, but Windwalker has so many keybinds, how could I possibly add in another? It doesn't anymore. Windwalker has had its keybind requirements cut way down in favor of a lot more passive bonuses. It is extremely efficient now, and it feels great. There's also some really smart tech that's been built into the Windwalker tree that I hope will also be expanded into Brewmaster that takes haste, which is basically a worthless stat for both of those two specs, and makes it increase the damage of skills directly. It basically just converts it without actually converting it into versatility or mastery or whatever. Now your haste just straight up increases the damage of Fists of Fury. Your haste is your chance for Rising Sun Kick to trigger a second time and restore 1 chi and do a bunch of extra damage. This is a really good design. I like it a lot. I do think it is a great way to fix haste as a worthless stat for Brewmaster monks, and I hope they expand on that soon. Shadowpan is the hero spec that's shared by Brewmaster and Windwalker, and I don't really like it. I wouldn't say it's bad. This isn't a Bear Druid situation where you have one good spec and one bad spec. Shadowpan is basically a huge proc of damage every 40 seconds or so, and I do want to emphasize that the proc is pretty big. When I was playing Shadowpan in dungeons, I was destroying packs of enemies. I wasn't cleaning house, I was demolishing house. I was a tornado in a trailer park. But it is basically a proc every 40 seconds. Kinda boring. Master of Harmony, the other hero spec, causes you to store up to 20% of all the damage you deal, and then unleashes it when you cast Celestial Brew. It also gives you a second charge of Celestial Brew, so it's absolutely insane for raids, but it also seems pretty strong for Mythic Plus as well, at least defensively. The Monk class tree has gotten a massive quality of life improvement. It is amazing now. You have so much more utility available. You are able to remove enrages with paralysis. You are able to afford to take speed taunt again. You also have things like lots of slows, the ability to dash forward in the air by double jumping after you roll, the ability to clash as all 3 monk specs, the ability to quickly leap into melee range just by rolling near an enemy. And like Windwalker, Brewmaster has gotten a complete spec overhaul as well. Rushing Jadewind is still there, but it's probably no longer a competitive talent option. Brew usage rates are way up, so special delivery value is going to increase as well. Bone Dust Brew is gone. Tiger Statue is gone. Angry David is no longer mandatory for pathing through the tree. The spec is really good now, and they fixed my biggest complaint with it, which was too many keybinds. The only downside I can see is that the removal of cooldowns and the increased number of brew uses means you're going to shift from a high number of keybinds to a small match of keybinds with a really high APM. This is what I crave. My wrists are very strong. For me it is perfect, but your mileage may vary and your wrists may suffer. Now is the time to get excited, and I am. Brewmaster Monk seems good, but more important than that, in fact much more important than that, it seems fun. You know, fun. What a concept. I actually think all of the tanks, except for Demon Hunter, are more fun in the next expansion than they are in Dragonflight, and the only reason Demon Hunter isn't more fun is because it hasn't gotten any real changes yet. But I know they will, and when they do, we'll talk about them. And I think that about covers it. Thanks for watching. Bye.